Abstract. Leadership development represents a substantial organizational investment, yet research consistently demonstrates that learning transfer, the application of trained skills to workplace contexts, remains disappointingly low. This article examines the organizational and individual factors that facilitate or inhibit leadership learning transfer, drawing on transfer of training literature and organizational behavior research. The analysis reveals that sustainable transfer requires integrated interventions across multiple organizational levels, including pre-training motivation building, manager-led transfer support, psychological safety cultivation, and aligned performance systems. Evidence suggests that organizations achieving higher transfer rates employ coordinated strategies that address learner motivation, social support structures, and opportunity to perform. The article presents practical frameworks for designing transfer-oriented leadership development systems and building organizational capability for continuous leadership learning. Organizations invest heavily in leadership development, yet the gap between training participation and workplace application remains substantial. While precise industry-wide statistics vary, research in the transfer of training domain consistently indicates that relatively modest portions of trained skills transfer to sustained workplace performance, or Baldwin and Ford, 1988, Ford et al. 2018. This transfer problem represents not merely a learning challenge but a strategic organizational issue with implications for competitive advantage, employee engagement, and change capacity. The leadership development transfer challenge intensifies as organizations navigate increasingly complex environments. Leaders face demands for adaptive decision-making, inclusive team development, and change leadership, capabilities that require deliberate practice and supportive organizational conditions to develop effectively. When newly trained leaders return to unchanged systems, unsupportive managers, or misaligned performance expectations, even well-designed development programs produce limited impact. This article examines why leadership learning transfer remains elusive and what evidence-based strategies can improve outcomes. Drawing on transfer of training research, organizational behavior studies, and documented organizational practices, we explore interventions that span the pre-training, learning, and post-training continuum. The focus centers on practical, implementable strategies that practitioners can adapt to their organizational contexts. The leadership development transfer landscape. Defining transfer in leadership development contexts. Transfer of training refers to the degree to which trainees effectively apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes gained in a training context to the job, Baldwin and Ford, 1988, page 63. In leadership development specifically, transfer encompasses both immediate application of discrete skills and longer-term integration of leadership approaches into daily practice. Leadership transfer differs from technical skill transfer in important ways. Leadership capabilities are inherently relational and context-dependent. What constitutes effective delegation, feedback, or conflict resolution varies across organizational cultures, team compositions, and situational demands. This contextual sensitivity means leadership transfer requires not just skill replication but adaptive application, Oderu and Wellman, 2009. Transfer can be conceptualized across several dimensions. Generalization, applying learned skills across different situations and contexts beyond those directly trained. Maintenance, sustaining skill application over time rather than reverting to previous behaviors. Adaptation, modifying learned approaches to fit novel or complex situations appropriately. State of leadership development practice. Leadership development has become increasingly sophisticated, incorporating experiential learning, coaching, action learning, and simulation-based approaches alongside traditional classroom instruction. Organizations often invest in multimodal programs that combine formal learning events with ongoing development activities. Despite these design improvements, several persistent challenges limit transfer. Organizational context disconnection. Development programs designed without sufficient attention to the organizational systems, culture, and constraints participants will encounter upon return often produce learning that feels abstract or inapplicable. Manager support variability. Participants' direct managers play critical roles in transfer, yet many receive no preparation for supporting their team members' development application. When managers are unaware of program content or unconvinced of its value, they may inadvertently discourage new behaviors. Performance system misalignment. Organizations sometimes train leaders in collaborative, coaching-oriented approaches while maintaining performance management systems that reward individual achievement and directive management styles. Time and resource constraints. Participants face competing demands that make sustained practice difficult. Without protected time and resources for application, initial attempts to use new skills may diminish. Drivers of transfer success and failure. Research identifies factors at multiple levels that influence transfer outcomes, Baldwin and Ford, 1988, Blumenthal 2010. Individual factors. Motivation to transfer and perceived utility of training. Self-efficacy regarding ability to apply new skills. Cognitive ability and learning orientation. Perception of personal relevance and career benefit. Intervention design factors. Alignment between training content and job requirements. Opportunities for practice and feedback during learning. Use of realistic scenarios and application planning. Incorporation of transfer-enhancing instructional principles. Organizational environment factors. Supervisor support for application and encouragement. Peer support and transfer climate within work groups. Opportunity to perform trained skills without excessive constraints. Accountability for application and recognition of transfer efforts. Alignment of performance management with trained behaviors. Meta-analytic research suggests that work environment factors often exert stronger influence on transfer than training design characteristics alone, highlighting the importance of viewing transfer as an organizational system challenge rather than purely an instructional design issue. Blumenthal 2010. Organizational and individual consequences of transfer failure. Organizational performance impacts. When leadership development fails to transfer, organizations experience several negative consequences beyond the direct financial cost of training investments. Lost productivity and performance improvement. Leadership behaviors influence team performance, employee engagement, innovation, and operational effectiveness. Research has demonstrated relationships between leadership quality and various performance outcomes, Orvolio et al. 2009. When trained leadership capabilities fail to transfer, potential performance improvements remain unrealized. Cynicism and reduced program credibility. Repeated experiences with development programs that produce no observable change can generate organizational cynicism. Employees may view leadership development as performative rather than substantive, reducing engagement in future initiatives and undermining change efforts. Slower organizational adaptation. In dynamic environments, organizations need leaders who can learn and adapt continuously. Poor transfer systems create organizations that are slow to evolve leadership practices in response to changing strategic demands or market conditions. Competitive disadvantage. Organizations that effectively develop leadership capability create advantages in execution quality, talent attraction and retention, and change capacity. Those that invest similarly in development but achieve poor transfer outcomes incur costs without corresponding benefits. Individual and team impacts. Transfer failure also creates negative consequences for program participants and their teams. Participant frustration and disengagement. Leaders who invest time and energy in development programs but find themselves unable to apply learning may experience frustration, reduced motivation, and diminished confidence in their development potential. Missed growth opportunities. Leadership development often occurs at career transition points where new capabilities are most needed. Transfer failure means individuals may struggle in new roles without the skills they were ostensibly prepared to use. Team confusion and inconsistency. When leaders learn new approaches but revert to previous behaviors, team members may experience confusion about expectations, inconsistency in leadership style, and uncertainty about organizational values and direction. Career implications. For high-potential leaders, participation in development programs often carries career advancement expectations. Inability to demonstrate learned capabilities may affect progression and opportunity access. Evidence-based organizational responses. Organizations achieving better transfer outcomes employ coordinated interventions across the learning cycle. The following sections describe evidence-based approaches with documented effectiveness. Pre-training motivation and expectation building. Research consistently identifies trainee motivation as an important predictor of transfer outcomes, Grohmann et al. 2014. Organizations can actively build transfer motivation before formal learning begins. Effective pre-training approaches include clear communication of learning objectives and expected applications. Participants who understand specifically how they will use new capabilities show higher motivation and transfer readiness. Manager briefings on program content and transfer support expectations. Engaging managers before their team members attend development helps create supportive post-training environments. Pre-work that connects current challenges to upcoming learning. Assignments that ask participants to identify situations where new skills will apply increase perceived relevance. Selection processes that assess readiness and commitment, ensuring participants view the development as valuable rather than obligatory improves engagement. Goal-setting activities that establish application intentions. Having participants articulate specific transfer goals before training increases follow-through. General Electric has historically invested in pre-program activities for their leadership development initiatives, including manager conversations about development objectives and post-program application expectations. These conversations help establish shared understanding of program purpose and create accountability for application. Manager and stakeholder transfer support systems. Supervisor support represents one of the most consistently documented influences on transfer, or Bloom et al. 2010. Organizations can systematize manager involvement rather than leaving it to chance. Strategies for engaging managers as transfer supporters. Manager preview sessions. Brief sessions where managers experience key program elements, understand learning objectives, and plan how to support application. Transfer support conversation guides. Structured protocols for pre-training, during training, and post-training conversations between participants and their managers. Manager accountability in performance discussions, including transfer support as an element of managerial performance and leadership assessment. Manager communities for supporting development, forums where managers share approaches for supporting skill application and address common challenges. Transfer partnerships beyond direct managers, involving senior leaders, mentors, or cross-functional partners in supporting application. Microsoft's leadership development programs incorporate manager engagement throughout the learning journey, including pre-program conversations about development goals and post-program check-ins on application progress. This systematic manager involvement helps normalize new behaviors and creates accountability for practice. Psychologically safe practice environments. Leadership skill development requires experimentation with new behaviors, which inherently involves risk of failure or awkwardness. Psychological safety, the belief that interpersonal risks will not be punished, facilitates this experimentation. Edmondson, 2019. Approaches for building transfer supportive psychological safety. Explicit messaging that learning involves experimentation. Leadership communications that normalize trying new approaches and learning from mistakes. Protected practice opportunities, creating lower stakes situations where leaders can practice new skills before high visibility applications. Learning-oriented feedback cultures, shifting feedback conversations toward development rather than purely evaluative judgment. Peer learning communities, cohort-based approaches where participants support each other's application efforts and share experiences. Leader vulnerability modeling, senior leaders sharing their own development journeys and ongoing learning challenges. Organizations in healthcare settings have implemented peer consultation groups where leaders practicing new approaches can discuss challenges, receive feedback, and problem-solve transfer obstacles in confidential settings. This creates psychological safety while providing practical support. Aligned performance and recognition systems. When performance management systems reward behaviors inconsistent with trained leadership approaches, participants face conflicting incentives. Alignment between development content and performance expectations strengthens transfer. Performance system alignment strategies. Competency framework integration, ensuring leadership competency models reflect and reinforce development program content. Behavior-based performance indicators, including specific trained behaviors in performance assessment criteria. 360-degree feedback aligned with learning, designing multi-rater feedback instruments that assess application of trained capabilities. Recognition of transfer efforts, acknowledging and celebrating examples of leaders successfully applying new skills. Promotion and succession criteria, incorporating demonstrated leadership capabilities into advancement decisions. Salesforce has worked to align their leadership expectations, performance management processes, and development programming around consistent leadership competencies. This alignment helps ensure that what leaders learn in development programs connects directly to how their performance is assessed and what advancement requires. Capability building design elements. The design of development interventions themselves significantly influences transfer potential. While content expertise matters, transfer-enhancing instructional principles often prove equally important. Design elements that facilitate transfer. Behavioral modeling and demonstration, showing concrete examples of effective skill application rather than purely conceptual instruction. Realistic practice with feedback, opportunities to try skills in simulated or real contexts and receive specific, actionable feedback. Error management training, explicitly incorporating mistakes into practice and helping participants learn to recover and adjust. Spaced practice over time, distributing learning and practice across extended periods rather than concentrated single events. Application planning and goal setting, structured activities where participants identify specific situations for skill application and potential obstacles. Transfer-oriented scenarios and cases, using examples that closely match participants' actual work contexts and challenges. Organizations are increasingly incorporating action learning projects where leadership development participants work on real organizational challenges while learning new capabilities. This embeds transfer opportunity directly into the learning design. Building long-term transfer capability. Beyond individual program interventions, organizations can build systemic capability for sustained leadership development transfer. Integrated learning system architecture. Rather than viewing leadership development as discrete programs, high-transfer organizations create integrated learning systems with connected elements. System components that reinforce transfer. Development pathways aligned to career progressions, sequenced learning that builds on previous development and connects to role transitions. Multiple modality integration, combining formal programs, coaching, stretch assignments, peer learning, and self-directed development. Continuous learning opportunities, providing ongoing skill building beyond episodic programs. Knowledge management for leadership practices, capturing and sharing effective approaches across the organization. Learning technology that supports application, tools that provide job aids, microlearning refreshers, and application tracking. These integrated approaches help normalize leadership learning as continuous rather than event-based, creating cultures where development and application are ongoing expectations. Distributed transfer ownership. Organizations achieving better transfer outcomes distribute responsibility for learning application across multiple roles rather than concentrating it with learning functions. Stakeholder roles in transfer ecosystems. Learning and development professionals, design transfer-oriented programs, provide tools and resources, measure and improve transfer outcomes. Line managers, create opportunities for application, provide feedback and coaching, model continuous learning. Senior leaders, set expectations for development application, recognize transfer successes, ensure system alignment. Participants themselves, take ownership of application planning, seek support and feedback, persist through implementation challenges. Human resources business partners, connect development to talent management processes, ensure performance system alignment. Internal communications, amplify transfer stories, reinforce learning culture messages. When transfer responsibility is shared and coordinated, it becomes embedded in organizational operations rather than depending on individual initiative. Measurement and continuous improvement. Organizations serious about transfer invest in measuring application outcomes and using data to improve transfer systems. Transfer measurement approaches. Behavior change tracking, assessing whether participants demonstrate trained behaviors in workplace contexts, or Kirkpatrick and Kirkpatrick, 2016. Manager and peer observations, gathering perspectives from those who work with participants on observable changes. Application barrier assessment, identifying common obstacles to transfer and addressing systemic issues. Longitudinal outcome tracking, examining whether development investments correlate with performance improvements over time. Transfer climate surveys, assessing organizational conditions that support or inhibit application. This measurement enables continuous improvement of both program design and organizational transfer support systems. Organizations can identify which interventions produce strong transfer, which participant populations need additional support, and which systemic barriers require attention. Learning culture development. Ultimately, sustained transfer depends on organizational cultures that value continuous development and support learning application. Cultural elements supporting transfer. Growth mindset encouragement, promoting beliefs that leadership capabilities develop through effort and practice rather than being fixed traits, Dweck, 2006. Failure tolerance and learning from mistakes, treating setbacks in skill application as learning opportunities rather than performance failures. Peer learning and knowledge sharing norms, creating expectation that leaders help each other develop and improve. Time allocation for development, providing realistic time for learning and practice rather than treating development as additional burden. Leadership learning visibility, senior leaders openly discussing their development goals and application efforts. Organizations like Intuit have invested deliberately in building learning cultures through both formal programs and informal mechanisms that reinforce continuous improvement mindsets and normalize experimentation. Conclusion. Leadership development transfer represents a complex organizational challenge requiring interventions across multiple levels and timeframes. The evidence suggests several clear implications for practice. Transfer is a system challenge, not just an instructional design problem. While well-designed learning experiences matter, organizational context factors, manager support, performance system alignment, psychological safety, opportunity to practice, often exert stronger influence on whether learning transfers to workplace application. Pre-training and post-training interventions deserve equal attention to training delivery. Organizations invest disproportionate resources in development program content and delivery while underinvesting in motivation building, transfer planning, and post-training support. Rebalancing this investment appears warranted. Manager engagement is not optional. Direct managers significantly influence transfer through encouragement, opportunity provision, feedback, and modeling. Treating manager involvement as optional or leaving it to individual manager discretion likely limits transfer potential. Transfer measurement enables improvement. Organizations that systematically assess transfer outcomes, identify barriers, and adjust interventions can continuously improve return on development investment. Long-term transfer capability requires cultural foundation. Sustainable transfer depends on organizational cultures that value learning, tolerate experimentation, and support continuous development as normal rather than exceptional. For practitioners, these findings suggest actionable priorities. Audit current leadership development systems for transfer support completeness, identifying gaps in pre-training motivation building, manager engagement, or post-training reinforcement. Pilot enhanced transfer interventions with specific programs, measuring outcomes to build evidence for broader implementation. Engage managers systematically as transfer partners, providing tools and expectations for their support role. Align performance management, succession planning, and recognition systems with development program content. Build communities of practice where leaders support each other's application efforts. Measure transfer outcomes and use data to drive continuous improvement. The gap between leadership development investment and workplace application is not inevitable. Organizations employing evidence-based transfer strategies can significantly improve the return on their development investments while building leadership capability that drives sustained performance advantage.